Hello and welcome to Rule of Carnage, a video series or podcast series about designing better miniature games. My name's Mike. You might know me from miniature games such as Gaslands and A Billion Suns. I'm here talking to Glenn Ford.
Hi, my name is Glenn Ford, and I've designed games such as SSO and Moonflight and Mean Streets 2084.
Oh yes,
and also worked development on Gaslands, Refueled, and A Billion Suns with Mike.
Yes, and a very nice job you did too. We are here revisiting a conversation from several months back on this here podcast, where we were talking about the limitations of theme in skirmish games. And in particular, we were musing on the fact that there are a couple of mega themes that everybody writes games around, and that there are a considerably larger number of topics for stories in novels and movies and all kinds of other media than you find in miniature skirmish games. So I rather rashly, without considering the consequences, proposed a design challenge at that point. And so we sent each other a couple of, a short list of novels that we might use as the root inspiration for a non-combat-y miniature game that was about something other than war or combat or shooting each other's kneecaps off. And in the last episode, we talked about Glenn's Too Weird to Live, where he took his surprisingly deep love of Hunter S. Thompson and his equal love of party game mechanics and created a miniature skirmish game about narrating under the influence of narcotics what your little miniature sees from their vantage point. And then we will spend a bit of time in this episode talking about what I did, which is ignore all the suggestions that Glenn provided and attempt to write a miniature skirmish game, attempt to write and then successfully get published a half-cut miniature skirmish game based on Paul Auster's the City of Glass. City of Glass. I don't think it has a "the" on the end of it, which is in part of the New York trilogy. So I'll just recap briefly. If you haven't read it, the City of Glass is the first of three short story sort of novellas in that New York trilogy, which are about the dissolution of identity and the sort of melting together of the idea of the author's sense of identity, the characters on the page, your understanding of the narrator, and the point of reference for all of that. And so in it, there's a melting together of various characters. And I think the first thing to say is that I took the theme, and there was definitely a way of engaging with the theme that was more close to the source material, which I ended up unsuccessfully translating. So I went with more generally the theme of what if the models on the table are not of fixed identity, and you just deploy some models on the table, and then as the game plays out, they mutate in front of you. And I'll be honest with you, I only played it solo, and I thought it was quite jolly solo, but it says here that it's a miniature game for 1 to 4 players. I'm not sure it works even at 2 players, but there you are. So should I describe the rules? What was the format here? Did you talk through this?
I mean, I talked very vaguely through what the
okay. Let me talk vaguely through it, because there's a few things that we can then have a conversation about. So the first thing to say is that although it's a miniature skirmish game and announces itself as such, I deliberately took a bunch of photos of chess pieces battling around a table with stacks of paperback books as the terrain, because I sort of got this funky idea that maybe this could be a miniature skirmish game that looks like it belonged in the pages of Country Living magazine rather than White Dwarf. So you set up a 3-foot table, and you randomly generate the stack of paperback books that you're supposed to have, and those create line of sight blocking, kind of the grid layout of New York City. And then you place some random models, and initially I was playing with little pulp sort of investigators because that pleased me, but for the photos I swapped them out for my grandfather's old chess pieces, which also looked really nice. And you've got a deck of cards, and you have a hand of cards, and each turn you play a card from your hand to essentially activate one of the miniatures, and you don't own any of the miniatures. The miniatures are all just there to be activated. And depending on what card gets played onto the miniature, it takes a role of private eye or victim or murderer or betrayer. And then it moves around the table, and essentially you're trying to get to a situation where there are two models that can't be seen by any other models, so that they can have their little story moment, and one model can be eliminated. And yeah, that's pretty much it. There's a few other bits and bobs, but the idea being that you just get down, you eliminate the models until there's one model remaining. And there probably should have been something about what the model remaining is determines the sort of narrative end state of the game. But that's, yeah, that was it. So
Yes.
tell me, Glenn, what were your impressions of it? Where do you think it succeeded and was interesting, and where do you think it failed and didn't?
I thought, I mean, because it tries to do a few interesting things. So, I mean, the first thing that it does is that the four models are shared amongst the players. So you flip out a card, and that decides first what the role of the model that you've chosen to move is, and then later on, or at least until a model is killed, it decides which model it is that you're controlling. I think it's interesting designing a competitive game where the models essentially are cooperatively moved around, because there's always the issue where, I mean, because one of the things that I picked up on as a comment when you posted up to me online is that one of the issues with it is it's won by there being one model left and the last model having been eliminated in your activation, which means that so long as there are three models, I cannot lose. As soon as I remove the third model, I can then lose in your activation, because there's two models, and then you can, in theory, immediately win the game. So there's inherently no impetus to ever be the person who removes the third from last model, because, and essentially all you really want to do is clump the models in the middle of the table and hold on to a bunch of high value cards and wait for somebody else to crumble and remove the third from last model.
Yeah, and so just to unpack what was going on in my head, and the implementation didn't live up to this, but if you've got a shared set of resources in terms of the models on the table, and you normally don't, then what you need is an imbalanced set of resources, an asymmetrical set of resources, which was supposed to be the cards in your hand. But I think that where I failed was that you had a symmetrical set of victory conditions. And I think that actually if you took the idea of a shared pool of miniatures, but you had asymmetrical victory conditions, that might be a more profitable way of attacking the problem. Because quite often you have symmetrical victory conditions, but asymmetrical resources at your hand. I don't know. I think there's something there, but yeah, you're right. That's what I was trying to dig for.
I think there's an interesting general rule of design here, and that's that if there's something that's disadvantageous and unfun to do, you don't need to write rules to stop people from doing it. Even when people go, oh, well, what if someone chooses to do this? Well, they'll ruin the game. Yeah, they would, but they'd also ruin their position in the game. So I'm not going to stop people from doing it. When there's something that will ruin the game that is highly advantageous to a player to do, that is a thing that should alarm bell should go off when it pops up. And I think that's one of the basic issue with that sort of when there are three models left situation is it's hugely advantageous to me to just tank the game at that point, to just go, I am never removing that one of those three models ever. I'll sit here for until the cows come home. I'm just never removing it because now I can never ever lose, and eventually you'll crack and take one of them off, and then I'll win. I think
if I'm completely honest, I feel like that is very much a symptom of me not being a board game designer. So that kind of like that rule of thumb that you've just described there. That feels to me like a very board game mechanical thing that you would spot often, because like miniature war games tend to be a lot more messy and don't have that kind of that crispness of state where you can really say that about anything.
I mean,
or it's
to be
really difficult
fair,
to write one of those. But the
yeah,
elegance, the simplicity of this meant that that thing emerged.
I mean, I think the other end of it, like there have been various times in Gaslands where somebody's popped up on a forum as saying, well, what if someone decides to do this, and the response is they'd have to be insane to do it. It's disadvantageous
Or like
to them.
in A Billion
And
Suns, where it's like,
fun.
what if I deploy 40 battleships? Well, you've lost, but I can do it. But
yeah, I mean,
lost.
you totally can do it, but the game's not going to tell you to. It's like in Moonflight, one of my previous Kickstarter games, it's a deck builder. Somebody at a convention was playtesting it, and they said, well, so I can just never buy any cards into my deck if I don't want to. I was like, well, I mean, yeah, you can. Well,
also do that in Dominion.
Yeah, you can do that. You can do that in every deck builder. Why would I that is one of those moments when your brain just cracks, where you're just like, yeah, you can just lose the game. You can never buy any properties.
I take my
Monopoly.
thumb and I push each of my goblins down until their legs break? What happens then, Glenn?
Yeah, so in this game Monopoly, I don't ever have to buy any property if I don't want to. I can just move endlessly around and lose all of my money.
Like a hobo.
Yeah, there are moments.
Anyway, I think that although this is interesting, I think that is a mechanical failure with my design, but it is essentially just it's somewhat incidental insofar as, like, yes, the game somewhat fails, but it's not really what it's about.
I think the idea of having shared miniatures is very interesting. I think the thing is, you just sat there and explained to me that it's this idea about the fact that the miniatures, these inert things, and they don't have like true objective realities to them, and the realities get placed upon them by the players during the game, and the way in which they get placed on is interesting. I had no idea that's, not to be funny, I didn't know that's what you were shooting for. With the thing that you put up and that I read and that I saw, that sounds like an interesting idea, an idea of layering up, that there are no ultimate truths to the miniatures on the models or the things on the table. There are no absolutes. It's funny because it's like when we were talking the other week about the fact that you fire a gun and you roll to hit and you roll to wound, and that makes sense because hitting is something that you can effect during a game, and wounding is a thing that is just naturally part of the gun. And you were very much like, no, those are not ultimate truths. That is not a reality of the way that guns work, and the way that shooting works. Those are totally sort of, put upon it interpretations, sort of arbitrary definitions that we've played upon the skirmish.
Why not always have a cloth roll, a flesh roll, a bones roll, a exit wound roll? And that's how guns work.
See, this is the thing. In a way, for me, the City of Glass that I would like to see you write is a City of Glass. It's about it's a game that says all of the rules that you've been taught about skirmish games are, totally arbitrary. There is no reason that there is a to hit roll and a to wound roll. They are truth laid upon what is upon the tabletop. And because that's what City of Glass applied to a skirmish game would be.
Maybe. I mean, that breakdown of reality thing, I think, I mean, it's much more about, I mean, so it's like the special cards are where this is supposed to be happening. So like there are ways of playing cards in the game which mutate the rolls or pass a roll or give something a roll very temporarily.
Yeah, because this is the thing about what you actually did as opposed to what I think you were aiming to do, is that, so in this City of Glass, there's a person who appears to be a victim and then turns out to be a murderer. That's every Raymond Chandler novel ever written. That's every hard-boiled detective story. There's always somebody who appears to be a victim and turns out to be a murderer. There's always somebody who appears to be the detective and is actually a traitor. The fact that there is somebody who has one role at the start of the story and then something happens and it turns out that secretly they had a hidden other role is every whodunit detective story ever. And I haven't read
it's almost like
Glass.
it's almost like I, like many other people, have read lots of Raymond Chandler and watched lots of detective movies, and I'm not a skilled storyteller as Paul Auster. And so I attempted to be Paul Auster and ended up just doing a Raymond Chandler because, you know.
I mean, this is the thing. I haven't read City of Glass, and from looking at the game, I assumed it was a pretty standard Raymond Chandler. Because okay, here's this person. They appear to be the victim. Turns out they're a femme fatale. They're actually the murderer. That's what City of Glass does. And I was just like, well, yeah, that's Little Sister. That's Poodle Springs. I love Raymond Chandler. I'm a huge Raymond Chandler fan. This is a pretty decent one-page Raymond Chandler thing. If the detective event occasionally just got socked in the jaw for being a good guy, this would be a perfect Raymond Chandler one-page game. And then you're like, oh, it's about the sort of the arbitrary nature of fluid identity. And it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
No part of that. When I read it.
Board.
I mean,
but this is the fun of the challenge. Is like, how do you break a 30-year pattern of engaging with miniature games in a way that, like, every muscle I have built is straining against. So yeah, I want to keep trying this. I want to keep trying this. But the problem is like, why and for who? And I think the answer is just because and for fun. But at the same time, there has been a bit of a practical usefulness, like the discussion that we were having about why would a non-combat game need line of sight, being something about, like, are you up to some nefarious things, or like, are you doing something that needs to not be seen by someone? Like, that started to find its way into other designs, and so I had a spark of inspiration this week about some new Mystic Skies potential scenarios, because I've been thinking a lot about that and chatting with Sean about it, and the idea of like a bazaar, a market full of esoteric and beautiful things, and actually, you know, you're in a city, you're not burning each other's faces off, you're trying to recover the, you know, desert artifacts before the other guys do. You start playing around with a bunch of line of sight mechanics, and instead of monsters, you have, you know, bargain hunters who can come and steal the goodies from you before. So I do think that, as with many things, like, you do experimental stuff to push your thinking sideways, and it isn't necessarily valuable in and of itself, but then you can bring it back to like the IP or the main thing that you're working on. And reading yours and thinking about the party game mechanics, like, there's a version of the world where I write a fringe contract set for A Billion Suns, which is like a weirdly sort of, like, it's a weirdly kind of card games and gambling and betting and bluffing mechanics, where, like, because you've got a deck of cards and because it's about smugglers, it all becomes like, you know, playing blackjack with spaceships. I don't know how to make it work yet, but like, that's a fun thing to think about from bouncing out of this experience.
I mean, we'll figure it out. I mean, seriously, I mean, I think it's worthwhile in and of itself, because I think that there is more. If we can in some small way suggest that you can do things with skirmish games, you know, that just break the box a little bit. I'm not saying that every single skirmish game has to throw away its guns and stop the slaughter, but just to say, look, there's more than one way of doing this. It is applicable in other ways. You know, if we can just have a little bit of the more out there, the more interesting, in the way that RPGs have been doing recently, in the way that board games have been doing, you know, for quite a while. I think that's valuable and necessary to skirmish games for them to sort of continue to be relevant. I mean, I think that the other day I was talking to somebody, and I said, "Oh, I design games," and they said, "Why are they all so violent?" And there's not really a good. I mean, the thing is, there is a good reason, is because violence tells a great story. You start off powerful, you get weaker, you understand what your goals are. It's why so many board games for so long were race games.
The risk is high, like the stakes are high.
Yeah, it's why so many board games are race games, because you instantly understand what you have to do in a race. You understand there's a start and a finish. You've got to go from the start to the finish. It creates a narrative. It explains your motivations. It tells you a lot of the rules just by telling you that it's a race. And when a game tells you that it's a battle between two forces, you know what your objectives are. You know how you're going to achieve them. It does a lot of heavy lifting, and it writes a lot of narrative, and it saves you a lot of time when you just say, yeah, it's a battle. And I think it's worth occasionally doing something a little bit harder in saying, okay, it's not a battle. It's not that simple. You are. And I think we're gradually seeing it with some of these, so many more games that have so many more scenarios and so many more, layered and built up and emergent scenarios, where it doesn't say, okay, you're a this doing a that. It's a sort of, okay, well, you're trying to achieve that, and you're trying to achieve that, and you're trying to do it while this is going on. As I say, we often refer back to Malifaux, that Malifaux is finally starting to go, okay, well, you're a party in a saloon somewhere. Somebody's laid a bunch of dynamite outside. You've got to try and diffuse it all, whilst meanwhile putting up posters saying that the other person at the party is a loser and a douchebag, and you know what I mean. And that's starting to eke into this thing of doing something a little bit different. And I think it's worth fighting. I think it's fighting the good fight, to be honest with you, is my personal take on it. And whether it ever gets to a point where it becomes a major mainstream game.
I think that's right, because one of the things that I'm finding interesting is by creating scenarios that lean in a non-violent way, or that have nothing to do with how many teeth you've kicked out of the other person, it's leading me to places where, so as well as this market bazaar scenario, the other one I've been writing, which I haven't really played enough, I haven't played it on the table yet to know if it's going to work yet, is sort of like a Connect 4 idea. So I've been playing around a lot with objectives, because I've been writing a Billion Suns Warzone contracts at the moment, and kind of gotten a little bit obsessed with them. And so I was sort of creating grids or networks of connected objective tokens, and asking you to capture enough of them to like create sort of sequences or patterns, so that the whole thing is a bit more like Ticket to Ride or something. And so that ends up, like, if you strip all of the miniatures and the combat away, it ends up being like a Connect 3 kind of a mobile game. And then the miniatures get reintroduced to be like, okay, the way that you connect the three things is that you have to maneuver these little miniatures around, and they have to do your bidding. And then essentially you're kind of doing a pattern thing, and you're like, okay, so can I just change the theme so that like I've got dogs and a farmer and these are sheep or something, and it's purely like the fun of the maneuvering and the fun of the pattern matching is still there, but you just didn't have any shotguns. I mean, the farmer has a shotgun, but he just carries it to look cool.
Farmers mums. The thing is that the idea that it's only interesting whether or not you can see something if you've got a gun in your hand seems to tell a sort of lie about the way I live my day-to-day life. It's repeatedly on every day. It's interesting to me whether or not I can see a particular thing. I'm often out shopping and I lose sight of my partner, and it is interesting to me whether or not I can find her again. And it's not because I want to then cap her from a distance with a sniper rifle. There is a world of reasons. The amount of violence the average person experiences in their lifetime is pretty minimal. The number of times during which a person cares about whether they can draw a line of sight to something, it's a regular occurrence in my life that I'm looking for.
Supermarket sweep game. Make a supermarket sweep game.
It's totally a skirmish game about looking for your car keys. But obviously there are grades of drama. And it feels sometimes like, if you watch like a long-term TV show and it starts off like quite small scale, and then at the end of the first season finale, someone dies, and that means that in the next series, 2 people have got to die, and it always ends up escalating to like, okay, well, we've blown up the entire village 4 times, so now we have to blow it up 9 times, and sometimes it feels like that's what happens with skirmish games, where it's like, well, what's the most dramatic thing that can happen? Death. Okay, where does the most death happen? War. Right. Every game is war now. And it's like, there are parts of life that can be dramatic and interesting and impactful, that can be, things other than whether or not you live or die. Love and, shopping and things like that.
That's where my head was going, is like, outside of being shot, the most exciting thing that happens to most people is having sex. So why aren't all board games, all miniature games, about 2 people trying to cop it off without being caught?
Okay, as you know, I've written a game that's called What Ho, that's based on it was meant to be based on P.G. Wodehouse, Agatha. It was meant to be based on P.G. Wodehouse, Agatha Christie, and Jane Austen. And I got the P.G. Wodehouse to work, and I got the Agatha Christie work. It is insanely difficult trying to write a game about 2 people falling in a skirmish game about getting 2 people to fall in love when you don't want one of them to fall in love with the other person. But there is no reason, no inherent reason there shouldn't be a game about, okay, you want that person to marry that person, and you've got to deliver love letters, and you've got to keep, chaperones out of the way, and etc., etc. That can happen in a skirmish game. I was
watching Sweeney Todd, the movie version of that recently, and there's a chaotic scene towards the end where you've got like 2 young lovers who like need to meet each other so that they can escape, and they need to be close together but not within sight of the adopted father, and they're like, the adopted father needs to be seen by the bloodthirsty betrayed father, and all, like there's a bunch of like characters that it's just like a Shakespearean sort of whirlwind of, if any of these pairings of characters are in the same situation, then some story happens.
Yes. Every French farce is a potential skirmish game. Every time there's a country house where 2 people are in the same room at the same time.
It's a good point, actually. I think if you look at it, City of Glass is a better Sweeney Todd game than it is a Paul Auster game. Now that I'm not even sure in which order I watched that film recently and wrote this game.
that might explain a lot. But this is the point. There is a world of stories that are based around line of sight and physical locations. Every story is based around the physical location of the participants of that story. Whether it's Romeo and Juliet or Sweeney Todd, it's like, it matters whether Romeo gets to see Juliet taking the sleeping draft. It matters whether he arrives before or after she's woken up.
Whether Romeo and Juliet, see their face, or if they're in disguise, or
Romeo and Juliet can be a miniature skirmish game, and it's just, I'm not saying I've got a problem with the fact that
is it in Hamlet where there's someone hiding behind a curtain?
That's Hamlet, yeah. Where he gets accidentally killed, and his son Laertes has to avenge his death. I know it's been a while since I've looked at Hamlet, but the point is, all of Shakespeare could be made into a skirmish game, you know, and
be pretty well
I'm not-
supported with miniatures as well. Actually, I'm going to go and do that. Shakespeare,
you know.
the miniatures game.
I'm serious. I'm genuine. I am very,
It's
very
not
serious
that, lads.
about this. You know, and I think it does behoove us as designers, you know, to consider putting things other than sticking 9 inches of steel into somebody's gullet into into a game, because it is interesting. It's interesting to a wider range of people, and it's, you know, and it can be fun, and it's worth doing. And that's why we wrote these things, whether or not they succeeded, whether or not, you know, they were what they were meant to be. They're gonna, as we said previously, we're going to put links to both City of Glass and Too Weird to Live in the show notes for this.
And if you didn't catch it, it was in this lovely issue of Tabletop Gaming,
Yes.
which will also you will also find a lovely review.
A review of a party game by me, as it so happens. So yes, City of Glass turned up in Tabletop Gaming magazine. I might get Too Weird to Live stuck in.
Maybe what we should do is randomly generate a page number of a review of a board game and turn it into a miniatures game. That might be a bad idea.
I mean, the odds of you happening to hit like the Game of Thrones board game and just writing another version of Warhammer is probably
maybe not randomize it.
Maybe go into my board game collection and throw a ping pong ball into the room. I'll put a sheet over Tyrannid Attack and it'll turn out just fine. Anyway, as I say, these games are in the show notes. Check them out. Let us know what you think of them. Tell us how severely we missed the mark, or whether we actually managed to do something interesting. If there is a novel, a book, something weird, obscure, non-violent that you think would make an interesting skirmish game, tell us about it. Tell us why you think it would make a good game. Stick a comment in the comment section, and we'll take a look at them. It's not impossible that we might write a quick game for them. We might do a roundup at a later point and talk about what would be interesting about various ideas. Either way, wherever you've found this, there's going to be a comment section. Give us a comment. If you've watched it this far, I assume you like some part of some of the things we did. Please like and subscribe. It does help us to do what we are doing.
Pass it on to a friend, why not?
Yes, tell somebody else about it. Tell everybody about it. Shout it from the rooftops. Not from an actual rooftop. That's dangerous. A balcony or tall ladder.
Unless it's some kind of racing game about delivering messages, and you have to scamper across the balconies in order to get there.
Yeah, if you're a qualified parkour participant, then feel free to run across rooftops shouting about it. For the rest of us, just find a second story window, don't lean out too far, and bellow Rule of Carnage into the street for us. That would be a real
I'll get you right into the mood.
Aside from that, hit us up on Twitter.
I'm Crikey Miles on Twitter. How do they find you, Glenn?
It's in the show notes. It's Mannequin
1.
It's Mannequin 1, I think, Twitter. I don't know, there's Twitter and there's Facebook and there's Instagram and there's other things.
Don't find me on Facebook.
You can't find Facebook. You can barely find Mike in his own toilet. I'm
routinely in my own toilet. I can often be found there.
I'm 36 hours into a Kickstarter campaign. You're lucky to have me on.
Yes. At the time of recording, this is very exciting.
Yes. It's time recording.
Posterity, what are you up to? What's the number that you're up to?
I don't know. It was 35% when I last looked, so it's a solid enough first.
By the time this comes out, that Kickstarter will still be running.
I think it'll probably be over by the time this comes out.
You missed it.
You've missed it, but whatever.
Unless you didn't, in which case, thank you, because it was a tremendously successful Kickstarter.
Yes, if you did back
targets off Glenn's expectations. Well done, everyone.
If you did back Turing, thank you very much. But Turing will be over, but I'm intending for there to be a Kickstarter for a reprint of SSO. So if you enjoy sci-fi survival horror, give me a little look up on Kickstarter. Anyway, that was a longer outro than is normal. Look us up on Twitter. It's been lovely chatting to you, Mike, and lovely talking to everybody about the insane games that we attempted to write. And for now, we'll sign off and say we'll see you in the next video. So bye.
See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.